Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Disaster and Emergency Management meeting of the 19th of May 2022. I'm Elizabeth Richardson, Council's General Manager. The Mayor, Councillor Connolly, is actually the chairperson of this committee, but for reasons for which we're aware, isn't present at this evening's meetings. In accordance with the committee constitution, the committee is required to elect a committee member to act as the chairperson in the absence of Councillor Connolly. I'll therefore call for nominations for the chairperson for tonight's Disaster and Emergency Committee. Sarah?
I nominate the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Calvert, please.
I'll second that.
I have a nomination of Councillor Calvert, nominated by Councillor Richards, seconded by Councillor Reardon. I'll take a vote on that. All in favour?
Aye.
Unanimous. I'll now ask Councillor Calvert to assume the chair.
General Manager, Councillor Sempronio hasn't got a Zoom link to go to the meeting. He's been sick.
We'll certainly arrange that.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for that vote of confidence. Very happy to take on this role for tonight, and it's very sad that the Mayor can't be here. Firstly, I'd like to say that Hawkesbury City Council acknowledges the Darug and Darking young people as the traditional custodians of the land of the Hawkesbury. We pay respect to all elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first persons of the country. I'll now hand over to the General Manager to go through some procedural matters.
Thank you, Chair. Committee members and members of the public attending the meeting this evening in Council chambers are advised that in the event of an emergency, you'll be asked to proceed in an orderly manner to the nearest exit following the guidance of our warden. I would also like to advise that meetings of council committees are recorded, and in the terms of the Privacy and Personal Information Protection Act, this may involve the recording of personal information provided at the time of the meeting. The recordings are made to assist staff in compiling the minutes of the meeting and to enable podcasting of the council committee meetings. The provision of any information that is recorded is voluntary, and if any person does not wish to be recorded, they should not address or request to address the meeting. The recordings may be made available to other persons where such access is in accordance with the relevant regulations, and the recordings are stored on Council's record management system. For the benefit of any persons who will be addressing the committee this evening, it is expected that you'll refrain from making any insult, allegation or personal reflection against any person present or not at this meeting. This request relates to both your address to the meeting and any answers given in response to questions from the committee. Finally, as a courtesy to others, it's requested that mobile phones either be turned off or turned to silent. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, General Manager. Apologies. Of course, we have apologies from the Mayor. Do we have other apologies, please? Do we have any others?
I think Councillor Zampogno is joining online. So.
Councillor Zampogno is joining us.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
There you are. Yes. Councillor Dogramachi, we've got no.
Councillor Dogramachi's online. Oh, Councillor Dogramachi's online as well.
Is he? Okay. Can't see him. Okay, no other apologies. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest, please?
Yes, please.
Councillor Richards.
I will have to leave the confirmation of minutes and item 001. Do I need to say that now or later? Later.
Well, there's only the two items. Yes. Okay. Well, you can say it now, but when we bring it up, you need to tell us in detail then what the conflict is. Any other conflicts? No. The confirmation of the minutes made by Councillor
I'll
Reardon.
need to leave.
Yeah, and Councillor Richards needs to leave. Would you like to tell us your conflict, please?
Yes, the conflict is significant non-pecuniary due to issues with the federal election. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a seconder for the Councillor Weigel? Does anyone wish to talk about the minutes? Any discussion? Councillor Lyons Bucket.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'm just wondering what the process is. When the minutes went to council, the minutes were accepted, but with additional points. And those points aren't included coming back to the committee. So I'm just wondering at what stage do the additional points get acted upon and how they come back to the committee?
General Manager.
Through you, Chair, we're certainly acting on those additional matters raised at the council meeting. What we're simply reporting back on is the committee, the minutes of that committee in September as a true and accurate record.
Oh, okay. Are these from September? I thought they were from March.
No, they're the September minutes.
No, they're March.
Oh, March. Sorry, I'm losing my mind, councillors.
Yes. That was my point, because I can see a gap in the process, that's all, because we did raise a number of matters around a couple of, there was more than 4 points when we passed those minutes in the council meeting. And now we've got the committee meeting, but we haven't got anything about those other points that were raised, which was about the costing of a flood officer and the potential sharing of a flood officer with Penrith Council. And there was also about the working group. And I think there was one other point. I haven't got the actual minutes. So I'm thinking we're confirming minutes here from a meeting, but we've already confirmed them at council and with additional points. I just feel something's not quite right there.
General Manager, did you wish to comment again?
Well, I'm not. I think simply the answer to that is that those minutes of the council meeting are being actioned. We were not in a position to be able to report back on those items at this particular meeting yet, but they are still they're still being worked on by the team.
Okay,
They're
thank
not
you.
lost.
So essentially we have 2 confirmations of minutes. We confirm them at the council meeting and then we confirm them here again. Okay.
Any further discussion? No other business arising from the minutes? Well, it's been moved by Councillor Reardon, seconded by Councillor Weigel. All those in favour, please raise your hand. In favour, Councillor Reardon, Councillor Weigel, Councillor Sheether, Councillor Cotlash, Councillor Durick, Councillor Wheeler, and Councillor Lyons Bucket and Councillor Calvert. Absent is Councillor Richards. I didn't get Councillor Sambrogno as a yes, and I can't see.
I'm a yes.
Can't see Councillor Dogramachi on my screen. Is he a yes too? He's disappeared down here. I can't see him. It says on the screen that he's here, but there's nobody there.
Mr. Mayor, there's more than one page of tiles for the Zoom.
If you can't see voting, it's against.
Well, he hasn't said anything, so I assume he's not voting. So that we'll count that as voting against. Declare it carried. The second item, once again, Councillor Richards needs to come and visit us and declare an interest. Councillor Richards, could you tell us what your interest is in this one, please?
Significant non-pecuniary due to issues that conflict with the federal election. Thank you.
Thank you. The item is the emergency planning response. Someone like to move that? Councillor Sheether, seconded by Councillor Weigel. Councillor Sheether, you wish to talk to it?
Couple of questions, Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
In relation to the information on page 18, the management of drain and stormwater clearing. I'm glad to see that council's acted fairly swiftly in recognising what the issues are here. In relation to the actual physical progression of that. We're looked at a budget. There's nothing in the budget. Could I have a direction from the general manager on just how we might proceed with this ASAP?
Before you do that, I think I should have asked Mr. Barton if he would run us through this before we start debating it, if that's all right, Councillor.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, through the chair. So to pick up on that point first, with the management of drainage and stormwater clearing, we've nominated a portion of the what was initially $1 million grant from the state government, which was provided to council within days of the flood, to fund that discovery work and the approvals pathways. That will provide us with the framework and the essentially the knowledge that we need to then move forward with some confidence to work out what are artificial drains versus natural water courses, and then what work can and can't be done and what requires approval and what those approvals look like. In terms of the other items, particularly the Pitt Town evacuation route. So since this report has been written, there's a few developments. So I've been in a position to be able to provide the learnings from the evacuation through, and particularly the two-way traffic, which was highlighted in the last committee meeting, through to the project group within Transport for New South Wales, looking at the flood evacuation routes for the Hawkesbury and Nepean Valley. So that's been captured and provided up there. And with the riverbanks, we are in the progress of establishing a recovery outreach centre for residents on Redbank Creek, with a view to dealing specifically with the challenges that they've encountered following the flash flooding through Redbank Creek and the bank erosion. So details will be coming out of that once we've got them finalised. But we're looking at a similar recovery outreach model, whereby we've got, I think, Resilience New South Wales, Service New South Wales, and hopefully our colleagues at LLS to attend that drop-in session. In terms of the other items, we have, I think I'll defer to my colleague, but I think we've finalised our submission to the Select Committee inquiry into the flooding across New South Wales. And I understand that committee will be visiting the Hawkesbury region sometime in June. Other than that, I think everything else is as read.
Councillor Sheether, did you want to ask the question again?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. One is in relation to the with progressive funding that might be for the stormwater, and if we have a view to negotiate with property owners to see whether or not they might contribute or do the work themselves, that sort of process. That's on the stormwater clearing. In relation to the electricity supply or the lack of it, I believe, and Kevin might be able to enlighten us on that some years ago, the electricity supply was supposed to be lifted above the 1 in 100. This was only 1 in 20. And the supply was cut off through Cat-Eye. That were not all the wires lifted up that height, or was there likely to be damage that couldn't be rectified? That the reason that it was cut off at so low, through you, Mr. Mayor, is any of the panel?
Well, I think your first question was about community sharing costs. Or
yeah.
Do we have someone to answer that?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, from our engagement with the community on the lowlands, I'd say it's fair to say that there is an appetite to share in that work. They're keen to get on with it, and we're trying to identify and simplify the pathway to do that, to ensure that no one's falling foul of any planning matters, and that will be one of the outcomes of this study, is to provide them with what would be required of them if they chose to do that work themselves. So we're certainly keen, and I think particularly the turf farmers, I understand that they took on this sort of a model on the north side of the river in the last 12, 18 months, whereby they undertook the work themselves.
Yep. And funding,
And so, yep.
and funding that might be incurred by council in that regard. How are we going to deal with that?
Mr. Barton.
Yeah, it's the longer term funding is a little bit more difficult. We simply don't know at this point what's involved, what's our responsibility versus private or natural, and the quantum of what is required either. Plus, there's that community participation, which will offset some of that cost. So, if we can get the well, with the findings of this report, we'll be in a position to make a case to at least seek some funding under the disaster recovery funding arrangements, potentially under the restoration of essential public assets, but it will be a matter of timing.
And your second question was about electricity supply.
Could I interrupt, Mr.
Yep.
Chair, if I may? Could I ask a question about the stormwater and the drain clearing? So we have a bit of a flow,
Yeah.
and then because I have also some questions about the electricity.
Okay.
Is it all right if we do it that way? Because
Well,
it might
it's
be
all
a
right
bit-
by me. Is it all right by Councillor Sheeter?
Yes,
Yes.
sorry
Yes, it
to,
is. Yes, okay.
sorry to interrupt. I'm just getting a bit confused. Is the management of the drainage and the stormwater clearing about infrastructure, or is it about actual just physical clearing of debris is that included as well?
Not in this initial tranche of work.
Right. Okay.
So the first step is to clarify what is artificial versus what is natural. So there are different considerations depending on that classification. So a natural waterway requires various approvals, fisheries permits, no doubt some engagement with the natural resource access regulator and so forth to do that work. If it's a natural waterway, if it's an artificial waterway, a drainage canal or structure, then it is or should be a simpler process to get approval to do works. But part of this is also looking at, given the time that's transpired since those drains were last cleared out, is that there may be some biodiversity issues that have, I suppose, crept in over time. And we'll be looking at that as part of the field studies.
Okay, so the reason I asked is, are we going to be considering using the armed forces at all for actual getting out and helping out with actual clearing of, of debris? Because of that's been, somebody in the community asked me that the other day, why don't we do that? And I'm thinking, well, I don't know why we don't do that.
It hasn't been suggested at this point, and I think given where we're at, from my experience and what I would expect is that the ADF are generally only mobilised in times of actual emergency and responding to emergency as opposed to the
Yeah.
cleanup.
I suppose
Yeah.
if we know something's coming and our staff obviously can't, traverse the whole of our LGA because it's so large, I think it was meant in those terms, like not necessarily an emergency, but we know that if an East Coast low is coming and we know, we're probably in for that sort of thing. So that sort of thing isn't being mapped in this particular project of where those sites that might bank up are.
It will. My understanding is that it will give some indication as to condition and what work would be required, and then we can, if we can't get it to be funded via the DRFA, the disaster recovery funding arrangements, and landowners aren't in a position to do that, then we can consider that as part of our business as usual for council moving into the future.
If
Can I
I
ask
may just
another
jump in there, councillors, if I can just, I think it's probably an important point to note there is around roles and responsibilities. And part of this work that Molino Stewart are doing is helping us to identify what those roles and responsibilities actually are. And my instinct is very little of this will actually be council's role, and we're simply performing a coordination role for much of it, I would expect.
Okay. My last question, sorry, still on drainage. You mentioned that the Red Bank, the people that were impacted around the Red Bank area, are we sort of having one approach to how we deal with those people in kind of urban areas as opposed to the more agricultural areas?
No. it's fundamentally the same issue in that it's a waterway which is, we believe, is managed by Crown. So the Red Bank Creek, there is no owner, as it were. It's a natural waterway. So, but it is the first time that they've been impacted in this way. So that's why we've taken the approach, unlike most of the other communities which have been impacted along the Hawkesbury River and the Colo and the McDonald River. This is the first time they've been impacted in this way. So it's something very new for them. And we're taking these steps in response to that.
Back to electricity. Councillor Sheeter, would you like to say your question again, please?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Some years ago, there was, and it was probably in the early 2000s, all the power lines supposed to be lifted up over the 1 in 100-year flood event. And seeing this as only 1 in 20-year event, and I see the reasons here, but if it was a physical problem, it was one that was overlooked in relation to the power being turned off. Is anybody on the panel that might be able to answer that?
Mr. Barton, are you in a position to answer that?
Not directly. Look, I could only speculate that at the end of the day, Essential Energy, Endeavour Energy, as a throwback to my country days, they're feeding electricity into homes which are flood prone and below the 1 in 100-year, and that requires certain infrastructure, substations, pole mount substations, pad mount substations to be in those locations. But as I said, I can only speculate that would be a significant barrier to achieving any sort of flood proofing. It's more about resilience and getting electricity back sooner, which in the report we've noted, and the observation in the AOC was that by and large the electricity did come back much faster where it had been cut simply because of the flood level. Obviously, where there's been major infrastructure damage up in the McDonald Valley, for example, they require road access. It's actually been the road access which has initially prevented them.
Any other members of the panel have anything they'd like to add to this? Nope. Not really.
I'd be speculating.
Okay. Councillor Sheeter.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. One more thing. We spoke about Richmond Bridge and with the handrailing. The community is not that concerned whether you lose a handrail or not, but they're certainly concerned about the time that it takes to repair it and the inconvenience of that time, simply because it was designed to lay down, and the last 2 floods hasn't been laid down. So if it's not, it needs to be changed, or the like. And it's not just the traffic. The walkway was closed. There was people sitting at each end of it, making sure that everyone was safe and all that sort of stuff. But it's still a big inconvenience to the community when something that was designed to work failed because of, I believe that the people that usually lay it down that were unavailable, and there's not too many around that can do it apparently. But that needs to be addressed. And I just wonder if anybody knows how that is being addressed.
Do we have any comments?
Yes, that was my question, and it cost the people a lot of money, the delay, and they lost a lot of money.
Mr. Jones doesn't want to comment at this stage.
Bruno from Transport for New South Wales is on there. He may be able to.
Bruno, how are you?
Yeah, good, Mr. Chair. Everybody, good evening. The rails, as we know, on the first event 2 years ago weren't lowered due to the time frame of the crews getting there. This time around, the crews couldn't get there. The water came up so fast that we could not get there for the railing. Hence, we turned around and reopened the road within a 6-hour time frame, as opposed to a 12-hour time frame from the previous time. So whilst we didn't react, or we weren't able to react quick enough for the railings on this second time round, we were actually able to react quite quickly and open the road in a timely manner, a manner that we haven't seen in the past. And whilst we had the walkway closed. We did do some consultation, and if there was anybody pedestrian wise that needed to cross the bridge, there were people at either side of the bridge to ensure that occurred. You will note that the repairs were done of an evening, and the access on the bridge was maintained at all times. It was always a stop-go scenario. My understanding is that our maintenance people are now looking into what we do into the future. But as we all know, the scope of works and the time that it takes to actually do all this is not an overnight process, and it needs to work effectively. And it probably needs to be something of the likes of, something hydraulic that would work, in the wet or dry. But just remembering that even though it's down on the reopening process, we won't be able to reopen it or even lift the railing until the debris is cleared. And that's the time. It's not the time of opening the road, it's the actual cleanup recovery time that takes us the time to do that.
Thank you for that answer. Councillor Shear, do you have any more questions? That's it. Any other questions, please? Nope. If not, the mover of the motion is Councillor Sheether. Did you want to speak on it?
Yeah, just briefly, Mayor, and thanks for that work on the bridge. It's overdue, and if that's the method looked at, it's appreciated. Just further in relation to the stormwater clearing, the drains to stormwater, we're looking from Magnus Banks to Wilberforce. We've also got Pittown and quite a few other places that we need not leave behind. And I don't know how we're going to deal with those. I know the workload that we've got and what's entailed in that. But the reason the workload's as great as what it is because we've done nothing for 30 years. And it's time we did something. And maybe some of the problems we've got may not have eventuated. And I'm glad to hear that we're working closely with the residents to achieve that, because I know they're really keen. And with the group that's working down at Cornwallis with the council, I think that's a great step forward. There's good communication there, and they're extremely happy with how that process is working. And with the responses in relation to the other issues, Mr. Mayor, I know everybody's really busy with what's happened. They don't call it a disaster for nothing. And I'm glad to see that the organisations are responding in the way they have. And with the resilience group at South Windsor that's been working with the council, I've only heard really good comments from the people they've helped and to get back on their feet. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shee. Is there any further discussion? No. Before we go though, Councillor Sheether, I think some councillors would disagree with your statement that we've done nothing for the last 30 years. I think there have been quite a few things done. Perhaps not any major works is what you're talking about, but I think flooding has been an issue that council's been looking at for every year I've been here, and we've been looking at ways of working on it and reducing the impact of it. Perhaps we haven't had any major infrastructure, but they're not because there's nothing being done. Perhaps it's too expensive to have it done. So, and I think our staff in particular have been very vigilant in looking after the flooding issue. Are there any other comments from our visitors or on this matter? No, because otherwise it's the end of this topic. Oh, Councillor Lyons Bucket, yes.
Oh, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think that the comments that I would have to make, I'm currently attending the floodplain conference, so I've done 2 days of that and another day tomorrow. Actually, the electricity was raised today. I think it was by Stephen Molino in a question, and that was more about the continuity of people keeping the knowledge about the floodplain and the infrastructure in the floodplain and not losing that knowledge, because in the past there've been upgrades and they haven't had the knowledge of what would have happened. There's been a lot that I've got have heard about it and have learnt, and a lot of examples, particularly from Queensland, but I think they're probably best suited to the workshop when we do those, because they don't directly relate to this specific issue. So I might leave it till then.
Okay. Any further discussion? If there's no further discussion, I'll put the motion. It's been moved by Councillor Sheether, seconded by Councillor Weigel, that we receive this information. All those in favour, please raise your hand. In favour of Councillor Calvert, Councillor Reardon, Councillor Weigel, Councillor Sheether, Councillor Cotlash, Councillor Durick, Councillor Lyons Bucket, Councillor Wheeler and Councillor Samprogno. Absent is Councillor Connolly, Councillor Richards and Councillor Dogramachi. I'll declare it carried. Is there any further business? Nope. Well, can I thank all the organisations who came tonight? I think it's great that we can get together and work on this in the future. We obviously have addressed a lot of the issues, as you can see by what's written in the business paper, and there's going to be a lot more to do. And I think the best part of this committee is that it gets us together, so we're all working in the same direction. I look forward to further meetings and moving forward again. So thanks very much for coming. Being no further business, I'll close the meeting. Thank you. At 7:03 p.m. Councillor Richards can come back now.